Welcome to the Pi Day demo, which consists of a recorded voiceover of around 10 hours of recorded footage of me putting together a song that appears on the Fractional Mirrors album that you just heard, Pi Day. Before we get started, I would like to address a few caveats about this demo that make it a little bit different from the way that I normally produce music. Number 1, running OBS recording software while I am putting together music eats up my computing resources. I end up running into a lot of crashes. Some segments of the video I wasn't able to record at all. As a matter of fact, after a certain point I was using so much CPU that eventually I wasn't able to do anything at all while recording, so I had to disable recording after a certain point. The other thing that's unique about this is that this song was pretty much entirely produced over the course of one day. There are some tweaks that I made in the weeks afterwards, where I continued to try to beat the song into the shape that it is on the album. So there are a number of features of the finished product that I'm really not that happy with. Number 1, I feel like the song overall is very overproduced and too sonically busy. You may also get to see that I ran into some problems with TalkNet generation that ended up affecting the quality of a final product. On the bright side, another way that you could look at this is that this demo is natty. You could think of it as representative of some of the problems that I encounter when I'm actually trying to make music. With all that said, let's get into it. During this initial segment, I've simply loaded a piano preset on one of my plugins and using it to improvise to sort of feel out or sketch how I want the song to go. Here I use the retrospective record feature in my DAW to capture what I've just played even though I wasn't actively recording it. Essentially it works by passively recording all the time, and then I can hit this button at the bottom to commit that to the track. At this point after the improvisation, I've gotten a feel for what tempo I want, so I set it to 75 beats per minute. After this point, I started getting into some sound design, trying to design my drum kit. I wanted to go for a sound that was big and industrial, reminiscent of the sounds that I had on the Mirrorwave album. Here I start setting up routing and effects for a gated reverb effect, which I'm going to use on the snare drum. The gated reverb effect consists of applying a gate to a reverb to cut it short. It's a very common sound in 80s music that was made popular by Phil Collins. Here I have applied the reverb, and now I've applied the gate. I decided to mess around with the drum sound a little more. At this point, I just decide to record the beat for the intro. It's a bit sloppy since I really don't know what I'm trying to play, but since this is all MIDI data, I'm going to edit it later anyways. I quantize the beat to get the hits to fit the tempo, and then I start editing. Next, I decide that I want to lay out the bass, so I go digging through presets for a good bass sound. For finding my bass sound, I decide that I also want a chord sound. I eventually settled on an organ sound that I had liked, and used it to record an organ part. And yes, I know it's clipping right now, but that's okay because it's a virtual instrument and I can adjust the volume later. Immediately afterwards, we encounter our first crash. After reloading the program, I record the organ part again, edit it a bit, and add some EQ. Then I decided that it would be neat to start the song with heavy reverb, and then create a transition effect in the intro, both by modulating the filter on the organ, using the bottom panel that you see right now, as well as starting out with heavy reverb, and then gradually ramping down the reverb mix as we progress into the intro. Here I finally decide to add a compressor and a little bit of EQ to help tame the volume levels on the organ. Next I record and edit the beat for the verse, followed by the organ. And now the bass. I also get the idea to introduce a small two-note figure here, which I will also mirror in the organ part. At this point, I'm also going to sketch in the vocals. Now you get to hear my amazing singing voice when I don't know exactly what I'm going to sing. Followed by some more editing of the organ part. And here is where I decide to mirror that 2-note figure that was in the bass. I also get the idea to add some licks to the organ part. For some reason here I decide that I need another keyboard sound. But before I figured out what I wanted to play for that second part, my computer said no, and decided to crash again. Now in this video we're around the 12-minute mark, but I've only covered around 30 minutes of actual footage. In order to reach my target of around an hour, I'm gonna have to pick up the pace a little, and be more selective about what I'm showing you. I got the idea to add an electric piano sound playing little plucks on the offbeat. Here I apply a bit crusher to give it some high frequency energy that'll allow it to stand out in the mix. I'm going for a kind of Frank Sinatra classic pop electronic hybrid, so it's worth adding a brass part as well. Here I write out a brass part that sort of acts as a call and response component to the vocal melody. Here I make the brass part a little thicker by doubling some notes in octaves. I like this jazzy major 9th 13 voicing that I used here. Just to give myself something to play over, I copied the drum part from the previous section in order to play over it for this next section. Then I record out an idea for this second section using an organ sound, followed by accidentally coming up with the transition to Twilight's part. Here I do some extra work on the drums, trying to get them to line up with some of the figures and the licks going on in the background. I also try to lay down a different beat for Pinky's second part. Here I decide to get rid of that keyboard sound from earlier. Here I try an interesting strategy for creating a bass line. I copy the kick drum part from previous clips and use it as a bass part, and I keep it on the same note to help build tension during this section. I flesh out this rhythmic idea by copying it into the brass. While having the pluck sound play around it. I've also made the pluck wider in the stereo field using a phaser effect. Here I decide I need some kind of a swelling pad sound. Here I use a technique called sidechain compression. Essentially, this is like normal compression, except the audio source that is used by the compressor to reduce volume is separate from the audio source that is actually being run through the compressor. Here I sidechain compress the pad to the drums, effectively making the pad lower in volume every single time the drum plays. This is to help put the pad in the background rather than the foreground. You can't see me right now, but I'm vibing. Uh-oh, we're running out of CPU. Unfortunately, it's time to increase the buffer size. Which is bad because that increases latency. For parts like this that I anticipate to be one-offs, I render them to audio, which helps me save some CPU that would otherwise be spent processing the plugin. I keep the plugin around and just disable it though, just in case I need to generate more sounds with it. For the second part, I decided to change the sound into a distorted organ sound with a phaser on it for a little bit of movement. I decide that we need to make the bass a little bit fatter in this part, so I layer another bass part on top of it. To make that rhythm really stand out, I duplicate it back into the kick. I work on the beat a little more, adding a drum fill for tension, and complementing that with an extended bass note. that stands out from the more sporadic bass part from before. I mock up the vocals for this section. Here I really start getting interesting with the beat for this part. Then I play out a brass part, which I magically like on the first take. Something like that might work. It may seem vaguely familiar to you. I make the pluck give the brass a little bit of high-end support by duplicating the brass part into the pluck and cutting out some of the bottom notes. Next, I need to think about how I'm going to transition into Twilight section. I mock up a bass part with a rather wide range compared to the previous section. It also has natural pauses, which are places where I can add swells later. I complement the bass part with the pluck, respecting those same natural pauses, followed by the brass. While I'm thinking about flow, I go back to the previous section, removing a drum hit to create additional tension. Then I go back to what I was working on. I decide to make the beat hit a little bit harder when it comes in. And I decide to make the beat really sporadic. Respecting those natural pauses, again. I decide to add something a little cute and light within those spaces, with some synth arpeggios that aren't heavy enough to completely fill in the space. I decide to mess around with automating panning to create some movement during the second section. Here I use the reverse playback technique to create some interesting swells. I also applied some EQ to make it stand out more, and some pan automation for extra movement. Now I need to work on Twilight's pi part, where she recites the digits of pi over a funny sounding beat. And a bass line. And the vocals. I'm 90% sure I stole this segment from somebody, but I don't remember who.
65358979323846264.
After this initial segment, we've got to dial up the energy levels again. I really like the way I handled this sporadic pluck part here. Suddenly, I get the idea to include some kind of pitch bending in here. At first, I think I'm going to put it on the synth plug part, but I ended up pulling out one of the plugins that I used to make the swells earlier, playing a pitch bended part, and then reversing that to create a pitch bended swell. And I do end up bringing in some more pitch bend on the organ. This bit sounded too harsh on the organ, so I moved it up to a pluck. And play this nifty little phrase on the organ at the end. We're building up again. Here I'm making sure I can still hear the bass in mono. That's one of the problems that you should be checking for. Here I grab some cymbals off my drum kit to reverse them and turn them into swells. Then I look for some funky sound effects to use as transitions. I take a rising sound effect and then reverse it to turn it into a zap. At this point, I want to start working on Twilight's rock section. So I'm going to export this portion of the track and then work on Twilight's section in a separate edit so I don't have to worry about the CPU usage from all of these plugins anymore. Before I do that though, I'm going to start with messing with the mixing on Pinky's part a little bit. I'm going to cut out the mid-lows from this brass so it interferes less with the organ, and add some mid-highs so you can still tell it's there. I personally don't think this reflects too well in the final mix, but it looked good at the time. Now let's talk about Twilight's section. As soon as I had the initial idea to make this song, I also had an idea of what I wanted each section to sound like. And for Twilight's, I wanted some kind of progressive garage rock. Something a basic bitch like Twilight would listen to. I start out by trying to create all of my sounds. I know I want my drum kit to sound extra wide, so I use the Drummer S73 in order to provide just that. I designed the drum kit, and I go through a bunch of different effects that I want to put on the drum kit. This one I think is really neat, but it's not what I was going for. In the end, I settle on some basic bitch distortion. I also create a synth bass sound to add some twanginess to the general sound of this section. Then I run it through Guitar Rig, which is a plugin that simulates a customizable array of guitar amps and effects, although in this case I'm using it on a synthesizer rather than a guitar. Then I decide it's time to set up my many guitar sounds that I use on this song. I have a very fuzzy guitar sound, an auto-filter guitar sound that I would call juicy, and a really nasal guitar sound that cuts through the mix easily. Then I start writing out the transition, having our new drums mimic the old drums from the previous section. When adding the bass part, I also added a high-pass filter to help the bass stay out of the way of the other instruments at the beginning of the transition. And of course our guitars. Note that I moved this recorded part to a different effects chain, because that's a thing that you can do when you're using a digital amp simulator. What comes after this build-up? Well, it's gotta be loud and it's gotta be up-tempo. Basically, I just want a wall of sound. Now it's just all about layering instruments. Here I play a little riff. And then I double it just like you would with vocals to add extra width. Now I forgot to record the second section where this wah riff was played. A wah is a guitar effect that uses filtering to effectively make it sound like the guitar is talking. Now I wanted to take this section and turn it into a verse, but I couldn't figure out how Twilight was going to sing over it. So instead I decided to do a key change and improvise on the bass. I end up with a weird time signature, and the prog head in me says, let's just keep that. Double the bass line into the synth part, and the guitar. Now I'm just chugging away to add a little bit more noise to the mix. And yes, I do loop this part because I did want to get this all done before the end of Pi Day. I start editing drums again. Drums are really important for determining the energy level of your song. Prior to this fill, I use an open hi-hat to increase energy. Now, a ridiculous amount of technical errors occurred during this recording, mostly having to do with sample rate, so the audio here isn't really salvageable. But this is the part where I record the instrumental behind Twilight actually singing, and this is also the part where I compose the singing melody. Just to really drive that progressive element home, I of course need to have a section where the time signature counts out pi, and I have a hell of a time trying to figure it out. I want this section to sound nasty, so I play what is known as the Devil's Chord, more commonly known as a tritone, on the synth. This is the most dissonant combination of two notes that you can play. And here I am trying to figure out how to play the same thing on the guitar. And here I am rubbing my pick all over the strings to make some random ass noises. Here I'm just adding a bunch of crazy noises in. This one's made using a guitar technique known as a pinch harmonic. More string rubbing. I really like this sound that I generated using the wah. So I ended up cutting it and putting it on a downbeat. Then I render out the entire thing. It's time to think about lyrics, making sure to consult plenty of online references because I don't actually know that much about baking pies. At this point I'm just listening to the song, singing along, and trying to figure out what I can come up with. Our favorite kind of pastry. These are not the world's most complex lyrics. Our favorite kind of pastry. Pop them in the oven, let them all bake. Verse 1 is where I introduce the subject matter, and in verse 2, I decide to elaborate on the different kinds of pies. After the transition into the next section, the lyrics pretty much wrote themselves. Then of course we need Twilight to talk about pi, the mathematical concept. And let's use Vim to replace all the numbers with the words standing for those numbers, so we can feed this into TalkNet, because I'm just hardcore like that. And that is definitely not a Stack Overflow window you see in the background. Now that we have our lyrics written out, it is time to sing. See, just one bite will take you away. I'm in the oven, let them all bake. Doing as many takes and as many edits as I need to arrive at something that I deem acceptable to feed into TalkNet. Now for the first section, I had the idea for the melody before I knew the lyrics that I was going to sing. But for the transition after the second section, the opposite is true. I have lyrics for this part, but I don't know exactly what they're going to sound like. But keep in mind, There's another meaning to mine, but my friend Twilight can't explain that better than I. What the fuck? Nope, that, I don't know what the fuck that was, but... Because I can't seem to figure out how to sing this part, I end up comparing myself against a tonal instrument, in this case an organ. Here I'm working on Twilight's part, and I decide to improvise a harmony part. The rhythm and harmony here are quite straightforward, which makes that easy to do. 4, 3, 3, 8, 3, 2, 7, 9, 3.1, 4, 1, 5, 9, 2, 6, 5, 3, 5, 8, 9, 7, 9, 3, 2, 3, 8, 4, 6, 2, 6, 4, 3, 3, 8, 3, 2, 7, 9. And of course, I have to figure out how to sing this section. It's a bit hectic, so I do some bolding in the lyrics to help me remember where to accent. And then it's time to generate. Notice how trying to upload too many files at once fails in Colab. And then we run into the big hole in this project. That is, I didn't do a mock-up at first, and we are clearly a little bit outside of Pinkie Pie's range, so now she sounds like a smoker.
Our favorite kind of pastry. I'm in the oven, let it boil.
I end up adjusting the input pitch and then readjusting it back in the DAW to get something approximating an acceptable result. I also used my special script to generate some supporting lines for Twilight during her weird time signature section. Oh, and here's an example of the autotune functionality in TalkNet fucking something up.
Gonna learn.
I start subbing in the AI vocals, and there's a whole lot of editing that goes on. I apply some saturation to the voice here for some extra dirtiness, as well as to help it stand out better in the mix. Here I get the idea to apply a delay effect to the vocal. Here I want to make the parts said by 15.ai stand out in the mix, so I apply a bit crusher to it. Here I am trying to desperately salvage Pinkie's voice. I try out multi-band compression, which I really don't understand.
So tasty, just one bite will take you.
At this point, I had basically run out of CPU, but the basic song is down. So it looks like we're a little bit short of an hour.
Always got to keep in mind my pacing.
But apparently I had misjudged how little workable content there is in the latter 4 hours of my recording. And frankly, I'm exhausted from working on this, so this is all you're gonna get. Hopefully you learned something. And that concludes the Pi Day demo.
Thanks for coming to see our show. Sad to tell you we've got to go. Grab your hat and head for the door. In case you didn't notice, there ain't any more. If you like our show, tell everyone, but if you think it stinks, keep your big mouth shut. We're glad you came, but we have to shout. Adios, au revoir, Wiedersehen, ta ta ta.
Goodbye.